Useful to the physician in assisting him to cure are the particulars of the most probable exciting cause of the acute disease, as also the most significant points in the whole history of the chronic disease, to enable him to discover its fundamental cause, which is generally due to a chronic miasm. In these investigations, the ascertainable physical constitution of the patient, especially when the disease is chronic, his moral and intellectual character, his occupation, mode of living, and habits, his social and domestic relations, his age, sexual function, etc., are to be taken into consideration. So, we need to have a look at Aphorism 5 and break it down so we understand it. We see 2 points. Let us take the second half first. He talks about his moral, intellectual character, the occupation, the mode of living, and habits, social and domestic relations, the age, sexual function, all to be taken into consideration. So if we look in a dictionary, and I like Dolan's, so I chose Dolan's, constitution means the makeup or functional habit of body determined by the genetic, biochemical, and physiological endowment of the individual, and modified in great measure by environmental factors. So when we look at this, let us have a look at the factors on which a human constitution depends. The first one is age. Why age? Well, age brings its own problems in the development of life. If as a young person has a strong vitality, middle age still strong but with experience, and in older age the body begins to break down. The sex of a person, if male, has different qualities to female, and different abilities, different way of the body working. Religious conviction also endows a person with a different way of thinking and belief system, and this has a very strong effect on the person's ability to cope with life. The occupation of a person. The occupation, if a person works with chemicals, the chemicals can have an effect. If they work in a job requires a great deal of mind work, that can have effect. If it's a physical job, the physical aspects of the job can cause problems and a way of dealing with things in the body. The mode of living, well, if a person leads a very fast life, lots of night activities and drinking, etc., this can bring its own issues. The habits of a person can be doing things which are detrimental to the health. A person may have a hereditary complaint which is in the family, has been inherited through generations, and is present, and this has to be taken into account so as to be able to deal with whatever problem the person brings with them, and see if the hereditary complaint has given an added weakness. The environment in which a person lives, is it damp, is it cold, is it miserable, is it poor air, it could be anything, but it needs to be looked at. The mentality of a person. The mentality of a person due to religious thinking, occupation, habits, mode of living, can cause its own issues, its own problems. This needs to be investigated carefully when ascertaining the problems of a disease state. The person needs to be looked at carefully in terms of the diseases they have suffered with in the past. Need to look at that and see if there's a general weakness or a track of a weakening disease that needs to be taken into account. Useful to know is if the patient has suffered a similar disease to what you are now looking at, what type of treatment was given them in the past, whether it was suppressive, allopathic, whatever, because this needs to be taken into account when treating a patient with a disorder. Also need to look very carefully at the miasmatic or infectious nature of diseases that the person has in his life. We need to look at the physical makeup of the patient to see if they are weak in some areas, overstrong in others, have a tendency to collapse or whatever, but this needs to be looked at very hard. Along with this, it is useful to know the patient's susceptibility towards heat or cold. Heat and cold is a differentiation that should be looked at, maybe not one to prescribe on, but the tendency to be made very cold or very hot is a useful one to know. Useful also is desires and aversions of food. Not just little things, I don't really like eggs, but something in which they can be physically sick from or really have a total aversion. And make sure it's not a religious one, it's not a habit. Find out that it's a genuine effect on the body. Another thing to look at and see if the patient has a diathesis, that is a tendency to suffer from one type or condition of disease. And see this, because this is a general weakness of the patient and is well worth examining. So at this point, we need to realize that the background information that Hahnemann says to ascertain is part of a medical diagnosis. It's not a spiritual one. This is not what we prescribe on. This is a historical and pathological evaluation of the patient to know what we are dealing with. So let us return to the beginning part of the Aphorism 5, where Hahnemann states useful to the physician in assisting him to cure are the particulars of the most probable exciting cause of the acute disease, as also the most significant points in the whole history of the chronic disease, to enable him to discover its fundamental cause, which is generally due to a chronic miasm. So what does this mean in reality? In this aphorism, Hahnemann mentions that the understanding of exciting cause assists the physician in curing acute diseases by helping in the selection of a remedy. So for example, if you think of diseases after exposure to cold weather, we might think of, for example, rust tox, natrum sulph, dulcamara. So it's important to have a look at the etiology and progression from a causation. The other aspect of it, apart from understanding the exciting cause, it also helps us in future to avoid situations or influences that we are susceptible to, or the patient is susceptible to, and we can avoid them. And sometimes just removal of the exciting cause alone is sufficient to bring the patient back to a healthy state. At this point, it's good to discuss maintaining cause. Maintaining cause are those causes which are responsible for prolonging a situation and keeps the disease process going. It's one of the major obstacles to cure, and maintaining cause produces almost pseudo-chronic disease states. For example, if you don't have enough of the right food, the right vitamins, and your life is not supported properly, that could be a maintaining cause. It looks like a disease state, but is the absence of things that you need. Also, if you have a deprivation of normal things like exercise, open air, that can cause major problems. Also, unhygienic conditions can cause what looks like a chronic disease. They can usually be fixed with local remedies. There's also the other side. If you reside in unhealthy areas, especially marshland with its noxious airs, this can cause problems. Also, if you're in a state of constant anxiety or worry or under prolonged emotional stress, this causes major problems and can look like a chronic disease. Hahnemann states you have to remove the maintaining cause, and that can be sufficient to bring a person back to health, provided there's no chronic miasm or infection present. So understanding that maintaining causes are very important in treating chronic disease. You can't cure a person without removing these causes, so we need to look very carefully in our initial investigation. In another podcast, we'll discuss the main causations of disease, and we need to know how to remove them. We have to be able to see them first, and it is amazing that an allopathy, with all the diagnostic equipment, they can see the problem sometimes, but they have nothing to relate medically a cause or a removal, because it is not pathological in their sense. So as a homeopath, we have the advantage of taking the symptom and then checking to see which remedies can produce that state. So Aphorism 5, in conclusion, is the background of the patient, the environment, the job, which sex they are, their age, where we can find different elements of the stage of life where a person is at and how things have influenced him. So any disease that comes on top of this is the soil in which the disease grows. So we don't have to spend a lot of time. We don't need to take the case over his past or her past. We just need to sit down and ascertain the general picture. It's only when we examine a case of absolute chronic disease will we perhaps dig a little deeper to see where the disease started. But Aphorism 5 is just basically a medical evaluation of the patient and thus the soil in which the disease grows in.